At my daughter's spring recital, I watched from the third row as she stepped onto that small stage, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She was only 12, wearing the navy blue dress we'd picked out together, her auburn hair pulled back in the neat bun she'd practiced perfecting for weeks. The auditorium was packed with families, cameras ready, proud smiles everywhere. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with nervous energy as parents clutched programs with their children's names printed in bold letters. This was supposed to be Emma's moment to shine, her chance to show our family what I'd been seeing for years, that she had something extraordinary inside her. That was before my mother leaned over and whispered, "This is embarrassing." Before my sister Rachel rolled her eyes and muttered, "She's off key already." Before my father stood up mid-song, shook his head in disgust, and walked straight out the back door. The whispers started spreading through our row like poison, cousins exchanging glances, aunts shaking their heads, uncles checking their phones with obvious boredom. I felt my cheeks burn as other families turned to see what the commotion was about, their confused faces wondering why an entire section was becoming restless during a child's performance. They didn't just leave quietly, they made sure everyone knew they were leaving. My mother gathered her purse with theatrical precision, her jewelry jingling as she stood up like she was making a statement. My sister sighed loud enough for the entire row to hear, adding a dramatic headshake for emphasis. My brother Marcus actually said, "I can't watch this anymore," before following them out, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. One by one, they filed out like dominoes falling. First my parents, then my siblings, then the aunts and uncles, then the cousins. 23 people from my family, each exit more deliberate than the last. Every single one of them walked out on my daughter Emma while she was singing her heart out on that stage. She saw them go. Her voice wavered for just a moment as she watched her grandmother's familiar gray coat disappear through the exit doors, as she noticed the empty chairs where her cousins had been sitting, as she realized that the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally had just proven they didn't. But she kept singing. She finished her song to scattered applause from strangers, while her own family abandoned her in the most public way possible. That was the night I realized I had to choose between them and her. And for the first time in my life, the choice was easy. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Jennifer, and today I'm a different person than I was 6 months ago. I'm sitting in my living room right now, looking at a gleaming first-place trophy that changed everything. It's not mine. It belongs to my 12-year-old daughter Emma, who just won the Regional Young Artists Competition, beating out over 200 contestants from across 3 states. The trophy catches the afternoon light streaming through our window, its gold surface reflecting years of practice, tears, determination, and ultimately triumph. Right next to it sits a scholarship certificate worth $15,000 to the prestigious Riverside Arts Academy, an opportunity that would have been impossible without the journey that started with one devastating night. The same daughter my family said had no talent whatsoever, the same little girl they walked out on during her school recital, leaving her standing alone on that stage, while strangers became her only audience. I can still remember the weight of that silence after they left. The echo of 23 empty chairs. The way Emma's voice trembled for just a moment before she found her strength again. That night, I thought we'd hit rock bottom. I thought their cruelty had broken something in both of us that couldn't be repaired. I was wrong. Sometimes rock bottom becomes the foundation you build your comeback on. I used to be the kind of person who apologized for taking up space, who made excuses for other people's cruelty and called it keeping the peace. I spent 34 years trying to shrink myself small enough to fit into their idea of acceptable, normal, realistic. I let my family convince me that my daughter's dreams were silly, that her voice was average, that we were wasting money on lessons she'd never amount to anything with. Every time Emma hit a perfect note, I heard their voices in my head telling me not to get my hopes up. Every time her teacher praised her progress, I found myself downplaying it, preparing for disappointment. I let them make me doubt my own child because I was so desperate for their approval that I forgot my job wasn't to please them, it was to protect her. I was so busy trying to manage their expectations that I nearly let them manage Emma's potential right out of existence. The saddest part wasn't that they didn't believe in her. It was that I almost let them convince me not to believe in her either. For years, I walked this tightrope between supporting Emma's dreams and avoiding my family's disapproval, never realizing that trying to do both was impossible. But that night at the recital, watching them abandon a 12-year-old mid-performance, something cracked open inside me. Not broke, cracked open like an egg, releasing something that had been waiting to emerge for years. I realized I'd been so afraid of disappointing them that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up for what mattered. Emma mattered. Her dreams mattered. Her voice mattered. And if they couldn't see that, then maybe it was time I stopped trying to make them see anything at all. Maybe it was time to stop seeking their approval and start earning my daughter's respect. This is the story of how my family's cruelty became my daughter's greatest motivation, how their rejection led to her triumph, how their absence taught us both that love isn't about blood relations. It's about showing up, believing in each other, and fighting for what matters. And how standing up for her taught me to finally stand up for myself. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who make it hardest for you to love yourself. But when you find the courage to choose differently, when you decide that protecting your child's dreams is more important than protecting your family's feelings, everything changes. This is about more than music, more than talent, more than one night at an elementary school recital. This is about the moment you realize that being a good daughter doesn't mean sacrificing being a good mother. This is about learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who can't love you the way you deserve. And this is about discovering that when you stop trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, you finally have room to grow into who you were always meant to be. Growing up, my family operated on a simple principle. Dreams were dangerous unless you were guaranteed to succeed. My mother, Margaret, was a retired bank manager who believed in realistic expectations and had a framed quote in her kitchen that read, "Hope for the best, expect the worst." She'd survived the recession of 2008 by being cautious, by never taking risks, by always having a backup plan for the backup plan. My father, Robert, worked construction for 37 years, starting at dawn and ending at dusk, his hands permanently stained with honest work, and his patience worn thin by anything that didn't produce immediate, measurable results. To him, success was a steady paycheck, a reliable truck, and a retirement fund that would last until you died. My sister Rachel became a nurse, practical, respectable, safe. She chose that career after our parents spent months convincing her that her original dream of becoming a veterinarian was too competitive and financially unrealistic. My brother Marcus went into accounting. Stable, predictable, approved. He'd wanted to be a teacher once, but our father convinced him that those who can't do, teach, and that he'd never make enough money to support a family. Watching my siblings abandon their dreams to meet our parents' expectations should have been a warning sign, but I was too young to understand the pattern then. Then there was me, Jennifer, the one who married a music teacher named David and had the audacity to encourage our daughter's artistic interests. In their eyes, this made me reckless, irresponsible, a dreamer raising another dreamer, and that was dangerous territory in the Coleman family. David taught middle school band and gave private guitar lessons on weekends, barely making enough to cover our mortgage but loving every minute of his work. To my family, a man who chose passion over profit was automatically suspect, and by extension, so was I for marrying him. They'd been politely dismissive of Emma's singing since she was small, but as she got older and more serious about it, their tolerance wore thin like old fabric about to tear. Emma had been taking voice lessons since she was 8, not because we had money to throw around. David and I both worked multiple jobs to afford them. I cleaned houses on weekends while David tutored struggling students after school. We drove an old Honda with a dent in the side and 200,000 miles on the odometer, shopped at thrift stores for Emma's clothes, and ate more pasta dinners than I care to count. But we never missed a lesson payment. Emma's voice was worth more than our comfort, more than new clothes or fancy dinners or family vacations. We knew she had something special from the time she was 4 years old and started singing along to the radio with perfect pitch. By 6, she was harmonizing with songs she'd never heard before. By 8, she could make our neighbors pause their gardening to listen when she practiced in our backyard. Emma had something rare, something that made people stop talking when she sang. Her voice teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called it an old soul in a young voice. She could hit notes that made grown adults tear up, and had a natural sense of rhythm that couldn't be taught. When Emma sang, the world became a little more beautiful, a little more hopeful. But to my family, talent without guaranteed success was just expensive noise. "She's not bad," my mother would say with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "But she's not Whitney Houston either." The comparison was always to impossible standards, never to Emma's own growth or joy. My father was more direct. "You're setting that girl up for disappointment. Not everyone can be a star." He'd say this while Emma was in earshot, not caring that his words landed on her 8-year-old heart like stones. Rachel would add, maybe she should focus on something more realistic, like academics, as if music and intelligence were mutually exclusive. And Marcus, who never attended any of Emma's performances anyway, would just shake his head and say, "I don't get it, it's just singing. Just singing." Like breathing was just breathing, like laughing was just laughing, like loving was just loving. He reduced her gift to its simplest form and dismissed it as worthless. The casual cruelty of that phrase, "just singing," still makes my chest tight when I remember it. They came to one Christmas program when Emma was 10. She sang Silent Night solo, her voice clear and sweet in the candlelit sanctuary, bringing several audience members to tears. I watched their faces during her performance, hoping to see some recognition of her beauty, some acknowledgement of her gift. Instead, I saw my mother checking her phone, my father stifling a yawn, my siblings exchanging bored glances. Afterward, while other families were hugging their children and taking pictures, while Emma glowed with the satisfaction of a job well done, my mother said, "Well, at least it was short." That was their version of a compliment. 4 minutes of pure magic reduced to a relief that it was over. I should have seen the pattern then. I should have recognized that they weren't just unimpressed. They were actively undermining her confidence and mine. Every backhanded comment, every dismissive glance, every realistic conversation was slowly eroding our foundation. They were teaching Emma that her gifts didn't matter, that her dreams were inconvenient, that her joy was somehow embarrassing to witness. And they were teaching me that supporting her made me a foolish mother, an impractical woman, a disappointment to the family legacy of settling for less. By the time Emma turned 12, she'd been selected for her school's spring recital, an honor given to only 6 students out of 200 in the music program. She was going to perform Somewhere Over the Rainbow, a song that showcased her 3-octave range and emotional depth. She practiced for months, working with Mrs. Patterson twice a week, perfecting every note, every breath, every gesture. She was proud, excited, nervous, and ready. The selection committee had called her voice exceptional for her age and professionally promising. I invited the whole family, hoping this time they'd see what I saw, hoping they'd finally understand that this wasn't just a phase or a hobby. This was Emma's gift, her calling, her path to a future that could be everything they said was impossible. I wanted them to witness her transformation on that stage, to see the confidence and joy that music brought to her life. I thought maybe, just maybe, if they saw her in her element, surrounded by the applause and recognition she deserved, they'd finally believe in her the way David and I did. I was naive enough to think that family loyalty would eventually win over their skepticism, that love would triumph over their need to be right about everything. The week before the recital, Emma practiced constantly, and I mean constantly. She'd wake up humming her song before her feet hit the bedroom floor, sing it in the shower with steam fogging the mirrors, whisper the lyrics while doing homework at the kitchen table. Her excitement was infectious and overwhelming. She'd grab my hand while we were cooking dinner and say, "Mom, what if I forget the words?" But she never forgot them. She knew every syllable, every pause, every moment where her voice would soar or drop to a whisper. The song had become part of her DNA, woven into her nervous system like a second heartbeat. She practiced her stage movements in front of our hallway mirror, perfecting the way she'd walk to center stage, how she'd hold the microphone, where she'd look during the emotional climax of the song. Emma had transformed from a shy 12-year-old into a confident performer, and watching that metamorphosis was like witnessing a butterfly emerge from its cocoon. She'd stand taller, speak with more authority, carry herself with a grace that seemed too mature for her age. Music didn't just change her voice. It changed her entire presence. David and I spent hours helping her prepare, turning our modest living room into a rehearsal studio. We practiced stage presence, using the coffee table as her stage, the overhead light as her spotlight. We talked about breathing techniques, about connecting with the audience even when you're nervous, about trusting your voice even when your hands are shaking. David, with his years of teaching experience, coached her on microphone technique and projection. I worked with her on the emotional aspects, how to channel nerves into power, how to tell a story through song, how to make 300 strangers feel like they were the only person in the room. The night before the performance, Emma laid out her dress with the care of a museum curator handling priceless art. She'd chosen it herself from the local department store, navy blue with tiny silver buttons, sophisticated enough for a young performer but still age-appropriate. She polished her black patent leather shoes until they gleamed like mirrors, practiced her hair one more time in the bathroom, and went to bed early with a smile on her face that could have powered the whole neighborhood. I remember standing in her doorway that night, watching her sleep peacefully, and feeling so proud I thought my chest might burst. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The morning of the recital, I called my mother to confirm everyone was coming. "Of course we'll be there," she said, but there was something flat in her voice, something distant and resigned. "Robert's not thrilled about sitting through a bunch of kids singing, but will make an appearance." An appearance. Not support, not celebration, not family pride. An appearance. Like it was a chore, an obligation, something to be endured rather than enjoyed. I should have caught that word choice, should have heard the warning in her tone, but I was too focused on Emma's happiness to read between the lines. My sister called an hour later with her own version of reluctant commitment. "We'll be there," Rachel said, "but you know how these school things go. They're usually pretty painful to sit through." Painful. Emma's moment of triumph was going to be painful for them to witness. Marcus texted instead of calling, "See you tonight. Hope it's not too long." Even through a text message, I could feel his reluctance, his assumption that this would be a waste of his time. The signs were there, flashing like neon warnings, but I chose to ignore them because I needed to believe they'd come through for Emma when it mattered. We arrived at Lincoln Elementary's auditorium an hour early. Emma wanted to practice on the actual stage, to get comfortable with the microphone and the lights and the way her voice would carry in the space. The auditorium was smaller than I'd remembered, maybe 300 seats arranged in neat rows facing a simple stage with burgundy curtains. The acoustics were surprisingly good, though. When Emma did her sound check, her voice filled every corner with warm, rich tones that made the janitor stop mopping to listen. Watching her up there, so small but so confident, adjusting her dress and testing the microphone with professional precision, I felt a surge of pride that nearly brought me to tears. This was her moment, her chance to shine in front of people who loved her, who wanted to see her succeed, who understood that dreams were worth pursuing even when success wasn't guaranteed. She looked like she belonged up there, like the stage was exactly where she was meant to be. For a moment, everything felt perfect. My family arrived 20 minutes before the show started, and I should have known something was wrong from their body language alone. 23 of them. Parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, but they moved like they were attending a funeral rather than a celebration. They took up an entire section, spreading across 3 rows, with the enthusiasm of people waiting for root canal procedures. No flowers, no cameras, no congratulatory smiles. Just 23 people who clearly wished they were anywhere else. But for a moment, seeing them all there, I felt hopeful. Maybe the sheer number of family members would create some positive energy. Maybe seeing Emma perform for a real audience would change their minds. Maybe they'd finally understand what David and I had been seeing all along, that Emma had something special, something worth celebrating and nurturing. I wanted to believe that family loyalty would eventually win over their skepticism, that blood would be thicker than their determination to be right about everything. The comments started immediately, though, like poison dripping into clear water. "This stage is awfully small," Rachel observed, looking around with barely concealed disdain. "How long is this thing supposed to last?" Marcus asked, checking his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. My mother surveyed the other families, all dressed up and holding flowers for their children, and said, "People certainly take these things seriously," with the same tone she might use to describe a bizarre religious ritual. The judgment in her voice was unmistakable. My father complained about the temperature, the uncomfortable seats, the parking situation. My aunt whispered about having to work early the next morning. My cousins were already looking bored, scrolling through their phones with practiced indifference. The collective energy from our section was so negative it felt like a dark cloud had settled over the entire left side of the auditorium. Other families were chatting excitedly, taking pictures, waving at their children during sound check. We sat in our rows like we were enduring a punishment. Emma was 5th on the program. We sat through 4 other performances. A 10-year-old's violin solo that was slightly off-key but earnest, twin sisters singing a duet about friendship, a boy playing piano with the intense concentration of a much older musician, a girl doing a dramatic reading that had several parents dabbing their eyes. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause from proud families, but my family fidgeted through each one like they were being tortured. My father kept checking his watch with increasing frequency. My mother whispered commentary about the other children's performances, none of it kind. The tension in our row was palpable, like a storm building pressure before it breaks. When the 4th performer finished and Emma's name was announced next, I felt my stomach clench with anticipation and dread. This was it. This was her moment. I turned to look at my family one more time, hoping to see some trace of excitement or support in their faces. Instead, I saw resignation, annoyance, and barely concealed impatience. My sister was already gathering her purse. My father had that look he got when he was about to make an executive decision. My mother was checking her phone like she had somewhere more important to be. That's when I realized they hadn't come to support Emma. They'd come to endure her. They'd come to fulfill their family obligation, and then leave with clear consciences, able to say they'd been there. They'd come to prove a point about unrealistic expectations and childhood fantasies. They'd come to watch Emma fail so they could be right about everything they'd been saying for years. The knowledge hit me like ice water in my veins, but it was too late to do anything about it. Emma's name had been called, and she was already walking toward the stage. Emma began to sing, and her voice filled the auditorium like liquid gold. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue. The opening notes were perfect, clear and sweet and full of hope. I felt my chest swell with pride, felt tears prick my eyes. This was my daughter, my beautiful, talented daughter, sharing her gift with the world. But 30 seconds into the song, I heard the first sigh from my family's row. Long, exaggerated, unmistakably dismissive. Emma's voice wavered for just a moment. She'd heard it too. She recovered quickly, pushing into the chorus with more confidence. But I could see the slight tremor in her hands now. And the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Emma's voice soared on those high notes, the ones she'd practiced 1,000 times, the ones that always gave me chills. But instead of applause or even respectful silence, I heard my father's chair creak as he shifted impatiently. I heard Rachel whisper something to the cousin next to her. I heard my mother clear her throat in that way she did when she was annoyed. That's when my father stood up. Right in the middle of the bridge, right as Emma was building to the most beautiful part of the song, he stood up and started moving toward the aisle. Not quietly, not discreetly. He stood up like he was leaving a boring meeting, with no regard for the fact that his granddaughter was performing. "Where are you going?" I whispered, reaching for his arm. He shook me off without even looking down. "This is painful to watch," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "The kid can't carry a tune in a bucket." That's when the exodus began. My mother gathered her purse, shooting me a look that said, "We tried to warn you." Rachel stood up next, rolling her eyes and shaking her head like she was deeply disappointed in me for subjecting them to this. Marcus followed, muttering, "I knew this was a waste of time." One by one, cousin after cousin, aunt after uncle, They filed out of that row like they were evacuating a disaster. Emma saw them leaving. Her voice caught on the words, "Why oh why can't I?" And for a terrifying moment, I thought she might stop singing altogether. But she didn't. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and sang the rest of that song to a half-empty section where her family should have been cheering. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why oh why can't I? She hit that final note with more power than she'd ever put into it before, her voice ringing through the auditorium like a battle cry. The applause from the remaining audience was thunderous, but it couldn't drown out the sound of the back doors slamming as the last of my family left the building. Emma took her bow to a standing ovation from strangers, while her own blood relatives walked to their cars in the parking lot. I sat frozen in that row, surrounded by empty chairs that should have been filled with the people who were supposed to love her most. The woman next to me, someone I'd never met, leaned over and said, "Your daughter has an incredible voice. You must be so proud." I was proud. I was also heartbroken. And for the first time in my 34 years, I was angry at them instead of disappointed in myself. That night, after Emma went to bed, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone like it was a loaded weapon. 17 missed calls from family members, all wanting to explain why they'd left, all wanting me to understand their perspective, all expecting me to smooth things over like I always did. The voicemails were a chorus of justification. She was off key. It was embarrassing. You're setting her up for failure. We were just being realistic. Not one apology. Not one acknowledgement that they'd hurt a child. Not one person taking responsibility for what they'd done to Emma in front of hundreds of people. I didn't return a single call. Instead, I did something that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. I called Mrs. Patterson, Emma's voice teacher, and asked about summer intensives, competitions, anything that would nurture Emma's talent instead of crushing it. My hands were shaking as I dialed, but my voice was steady. I was done seeking their approval and ready to start building Emma's future with people who actually believed in her. "Jennifer," Mrs. Patterson said when I explained what had happened, "Emma has real potential. There's a regional young artists competition coming up in August. It's competitive. Kids come from all over the tri-state area, some with years of professional training. But I think she could do well." The entry fee was $200, money I'd been saving for new tires for our ancient Honda. But priorities had shifted permanently that night. My daughter's dreams were now more important than transportation, more important than my family's approval, more important than keeping the peace. I signed Emma up that night, paying the entry fee with money from our emergency fund, because this was an emergency of belief, of hope, of finally putting my child's needs before my family's comfort. As I filled out the application, writing Emma's name in careful block letters, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The exhilaration of choosing her over them, of betting on her talent instead of their limitations. The next morning, Emma was quiet over breakfast, pushing her cereal around her bowl like she was stirring her thoughts instead of eating. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than her 12 years and said, "Mom, why did everyone leave?" The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. I took a deep breath and made a decision that changed everything about our relationship. I told her the truth. "Because they don't understand how special you are, sweetheart," I said, sitting down across from her and taking her small hands in mine. "But that doesn't make you any less special. It just means we need to find people who do understand." I watched her process this, watched her young mind grapple with the reality that family doesn't always mean love, that blood doesn't guarantee support, that sometimes the people who should lift you up are the ones who try to tear you down. "Are we still going to see them?" she asked. And there was hope in her voice that maybe this was all a misunderstanding, maybe they'd apologize and things would go back to normal. I realized that normal was exactly what we needed to escape from. "Not for a while," I said. "Right now, we're going to focus on people who want to see you succeed." I called my mother that afternoon. Not to apologize, not to make peace, not to pretend everything was fine, but to set boundaries that should have been established years ago. "What you did last night was unacceptable," I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been when talking to her. "Emma is 12 years old, and you walked out on her mid-performance. You embarrassed her, You hurt her, and you showed her exactly how little you think of her dreams. My mother immediately went on the defensive, her voice rising to that familiar pitch that had always made me back down before. Oh, Jennifer, don't be so dramatic. We just couldn't sit through that whole thing. The girl needs to learn that not everyone gets a trophy. She needs realistic expectations. The words that had always made me doubt myself now sounded hollow, cruel, small. I could hear the fear underneath them. Fear that Emma might actually succeed and prove them wrong about everything. She wasn't asking for a trophy, I said, feeling power in my voice that I'd never accessed before. She was asking for support from her family, and you couldn't even give her that much. The conversation escalated from there, with her accusing me of being oversensitive, ungrateful, delusional about Emma's abilities. She trotted out every manipulation she'd used for 34 years. Guilt, obligation, family loyalty, the sacrifices they'd made for me. But this time, none of it worked. This time, I had something more powerful than her disapproval to motivate me. I had Emma's hurt face burned into my memory, the image of her singing to empty chairs, the sound of her voice wavering when she realized her own family was abandoning her. The conversation ended with my mother demanding that I come to my senses, and me hanging up without saying goodbye. It was the first time in my life I'd hung up on her, and it felt like breaking a chain that had been wrapped around my throat for decades. For the next 3 months, Emma and I worked toward the competition like it was our mission, our purpose, our way of proving that dreams matter more than doubts. We practiced every day, before school, after homework, on weekends. We drove 2 hours twice a week to work with a specialized vocal coach Mrs. Patterson recommended. A woman named Diana, who had trained professional singers and who saw immediately that Emma had something rare. We researched other competitors, studied performance techniques on YouTube, watched recordings of past competitions until we understood what excellence looked like at this level. We transformed our living room into a rehearsal space with proper lighting and a makeshift stage area. David supported us completely, taking on extra tutoring students to pay for Emma's coaching, driving her to lessons when I had to work, becoming her biggest cheerleader and technical advisor. My family's silence was deafening and liberating at the same time. No calls asking how Emma was doing, no interest in her progress, no fake concern or backhanded advice, no acknowledgement that they'd done anything wrong. Their absence actually made everything easier, cleaner, more focused. Without their constant doubt and criticism clouding our judgment, Emma flourished like a plant finally getting enough sunlight. Her confidence grew with every lesson, every practice session, every small breakthrough. She learned to trust her instincts, to take creative risks, to command a stage like she owned it. Diana taught her advanced breathing techniques, helped her expand her range, showed her how to connect emotionally with lyrics in ways that made grown adults weep. Emma wasn't just getting better, she was becoming the artist she was always meant to be. The day of the Regional Young Artists Competition, Emma performed Bridge Over Troubled Water for a panel of professional judges and an audience of 300 people. The song choice was deliberate. It showcased her 3-octave range, her emotional maturity, and her ability to build a performance from whisper-quiet verses to soaring, powerful choruses. She was competing against teenagers, against kids who'd been training for years at expensive conservatories, against talents I couldn't believe existed in children so young. But when Emma stepped onto that stage, wearing the same navy blue dress from her school recital, but carrying herself with completely different energy, I knew we'd already won something more important than any competition. She owned that stage from the first note, commanded the attention of every person in that auditorium, delivered a performance that left the judges scribbling notes frantically, and the audience holding their breath. She won first place out of 200 contestants from across 3 states. The judges said her voice had exceptional emotional maturity and rare natural ability. They offered her a full scholarship to a summer program at the State University's Music Conservatory. They asked if she'd be interested in auditioning for the Youth Symphony's upcoming production. They treated her like the artist I'd always known she was, the talent my family had dismissed as worthless noise. That night, holding her trophy and her scholarship certificate, Emma said something that stopped my heart. "Mom, I'm glad they left the recital. I asked her why, though I think I already knew the answer. Because if they'd stayed, I might not have gotten mad enough to get better. I might not have realized I had to prove them wrong. From the mouths of babes. She'd turned their rejection into motivation, their absence into strength, their cruelty into fuel for her success. At 12 years old, my daughter had learned something it took me 34 years to understand. Sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who motivate you most to prove your worth. I never called my family to tell them about Emma's win. I didn't need their validation anymore, and neither did she. We had something better now. We had proof. Proof that talent is real, that dreams matter, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who can't love you the way you deserve. Proof that choosing your child's future over your family's comfort is not just acceptable, it's necessary. 6 months later, Emma's preparing for the state competition, practicing in our living room while I make dinner, her voice filling our house with music that sounds like hope made audible. We don't have a big audience anymore, but we have the right audience. People who see her gift and want to help it grow, who understand that supporting someone's dreams is an honor, not a burden. And sometimes, when Emma hits a particularly beautiful note and I see the joy on her face, I think about that night at the recital. I think about 23 empty chairs, and one small girl finding the courage to keep singing anyway. Sometimes losing the wrong support is the first step toward finding the right support. Sometimes the best thing your family can do for you is show you exactly who they are so you know exactly who you don't want to be. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can teach your child is that their dreams are worth fighting for, even when the people who should be fighting alongside you choose to walk away instead. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.